Greetings, everyone. So, somebody sent me a text message saying, here is a link to a video talking about how the Pope just recently said that he is a communist and Jesus was a communist. So I did click on the link, quite intrigued by it. It was actually a Polish video, and they did mention that the Pope, during an interview, did just say this recently. So rather than believe this immediately, I thought it might be better to go and find that original interview and see if the Pope did say that. So it turned out that the interview was with a publication called America Magazine that many of you may have heard of, particularly the US viewers, because it's a publication in America, in the USA, I should say, North America. Now, one might immediately ask, why is the Pope even giving an interview to America Magazine, considering that it's run by a fairly well-known Jesuit priest named Father James Martin, who again you may have heard of. If you haven't, there's a lot that could be said about him, but to put it maybe most simply, one could say Father James Martin isn't keen on the Catholic Church's teaching on homosexuality. But since the Pope has happily welcomed Father James Martin to the Vatican to speak to him there, why would he not give an interview to his publication, America Magazine? Now, I had to go through a lot of bad questions to get to the actual question and answer that I was looking for. There were all kinds of questions asked. I think there were 4 or 5 of them from America Magazine there asking the Pope various questions. This is when they went to see him in Rome. The interview took place on November the 22nd. It was published by America Magazine on November the 28th. And I've only just learned about this recently. They were asking him questions on racism and on women's ordination. And to be honest, the Pope, I mean, with the question of women's ordination, for example, he basically said no, there won't be any women's ordination, but he said it in a very long-winded way as to sort of explain the importance of women in the church and the roles of women in the church. But he was basically saying, no, there isn't going to be any ordination of women. And generally, I think the Pope was pushing back, but in a very polite way, in a very diplomatic way, to all these questions they were trying to push on him. But I did finally find that question that led to his answer, where he allegedly said that he is a communist and Jesus was a communist. And let's go through it in context, and let's have a look at the whole answer to the question. So here is the question and the answer. Let's have a read of this. So the question is from Matt Malone, SJ. He says, in the United States, there are those who interpret your criticisms of market capitalism as criticisms of the United States. There are even some who think you may be a socialist, or they call you a communist, or they call you a Marxist. You, of course, have always said you are following the gospel. How do you respond to those who say that what the church and you have to say about economics isn't important? And here is the Pope's full response to that question. Nothing taken out of context. Here is what he says. I always ask myself, where does this labeling come from? For example, when we were returning from Ireland on the plane, a letter from an American prelate erupted that said all kinds of things about me. I try to follow the gospel. I am much enlightened by the Beatitudes, but above all by the standard by which we will be judged. Matthew 25, I was thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was in prison and you visited me. I was sick and you cared for me. Is Jesus a communist then? The problem that is behind this, that you have rightly touched on, is the socio-political reduction of the gospel message. If I see the gospel in a sociological way only, yes, I'm a communist, and so too is Jesus. Behind these Beatitudes and Matthew 25, there is a message that is Jesus's own, and that is to be Christian. The communists stole some of our Christian values. Some others, they made a disaster out of them. So there it is. That is the full answer, not one sentence taken out of context. Because, of course, if you just took that little bit and isolated it, yes, I am a communist, and so too is Jesus. That doesn't sound so great, does it? But I think the Pope here is essentially saying, look, communism took a lot of good things from Christianity, namely, most importantly, to care and love for one another, to share things with each other, to help one another out, to make sure that no one is left, worse off than anyone else, that we're all equal before God, in a sense. They took those ideas and then they completely skewed them and twisted them and perverted them. And in that sense, because he's also said before that communists are almost Christian at heart, and I think by that he's meant they take Christian ideas, that this whole communist ideology takes core and key Christian ideas, but then it uses them, basically. It's not an honest system. It just uses positive things, good things, and then it does its own thing. So there's the answer, guys, ladies and gents. What do you think about that? Do you think that he still shouldn't have even gone there and said anything about him and Jesus being communist? Or do you think that actually in context that answer isn't as bad as it might have seemed if you'd have just heard that little bit or read that little bit isolated? So there we are. That's that, folks. I hope that's cleared things up a little bit, if anyone heard about this, because honestly, as I say, somebody sent this to me, and I thought, oh, great, because the Pope has said things in the past that one has thought, why did he say that, or could he have said that better? But I think this might be another case of people trying to twist what the Pope has said, and that does happen a lot. And I think it doesn't help sometimes that Pope Francis says things in a very ambiguous way or a very diplomatic way, because then vultures will pounce on that and they will try to turn it into what they want people to think he said. I think one of the best examples of that was when he was asked about homosexuality and he said, who am I to judge? And that turned into somehow the Pope basically says it's completely okay. And it wasn't what he was saying at all. But there have been many other examples of that, and this might be another one. Now, I haven't seen this really in the mainstream media, so they didn't perhaps latch onto this as they have to other things that the Pope has said. But if they did at some point, or if any Catholic outlets have tried to use this, then they have the whole answer to the question. Feel free, if you want to give America Magazine a click to look at the actual interview. It is on their website. There are all kinds of other questions too that are hard to read. Some of the questions are hard to read because you can see what's behind the questions and what they want the Pope to say. But I think generally he answers their questions quite well. But there we go. That's that. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and see you again soon.